This is Roundtable number 3, and the topic, slightly differentiated for this session, is Borderlands. And Borderlands are the things that utilities and data centers are or can work on together to further the industry. So we've talked all around this. Now we're going to get right down in the weeds. So please take your seats.
Okay.
Mukesh, Khattar, and Rich Miller are going to co-chair this because it's a very rich discussion. I want a lot of audience participation. People understand this very well. We're going to talk about microgrids and blockchain and renewable distributed energy. So Mukesh, take it away, would you?
Thank you, Bruce. Thank you very much. Good afternoon. And I think this is in one of the situations where we are in between you and your last session, the drinks. So hopefully we'll try to make it fast and good for you. My name is Mukesh Khattar. I'm with Electric Power Research Institute. How many of you have heard about EPRI, Electric Power Research Institute? Very few people. So let me give you a little background what it is. It's an organization that came into existence after the big blackout that happened in the late 60s, early 70s. And it's a collaborative R&D organization that looks into power generation, distribution, transmission, environmental impact, EMF impact. Think of whatever that has to do with the generation of electron and consumption of electron. The nearest comparison I can talk about is, how many of you are aware about Bell Labs that came up with the semiconductor? It was a collaborative R&D between the telephone companies. Similarly, the EPRI is a collaborative R&D, not-for-profit, between the electric power companies around the world. We have members which are not only in the US, but all across the country, across the globe. And I like my job in the sense that we look at the electricity. I think of it as an electron coming down the meter, and before it dissipates into the ground, you make the best use of it. That's what it is, what we talk about. We look into all different types of technology solutions based on science and technology, on the fundamentals, down to the practical application. We look into the development that are happening in the industry, in our related industry like IoT, in data centers and other activities, and then try to see how we can bring the best of these things together into a unified manner and get into not only conceptual design, but field demonstrations also. That's a very brief background about EPRI. And I have Rich here, who's going to talk about, he comes from the data center background. And by the way, before I joined EPRI about 3 years ago, I spent quite a bit of time at Oracle, where I learned a lot about data centers. In fact, was designed a couple of their data centers that went on to win energy efficient design. The one, I think the last one was running at a PUE of less than 1.1, just for cooling only, partial PUE. So have some background in the data center space as well. Rich?
Thank you, Mukesh. My name's Rich Miller. I'm with Data Center Frontier. We write about the data center industry looking towards the horizon and some of the new technologies that are going to drive demand and what that means for where we build data centers, how we build them, and essentially how the new technology is going to shape the industry. I used to work at a site called Data Center Knowledge, which I also founded, which a lot of folks are aware of, and covers the industry on a broad basis. Essentially, we've been covering, I've been writing about efficiency for a long time. What we've seen developing on the energy front is that the focus has really expanded a great deal. It was good to hear folks talk today about how much the industry has accomplished in terms of driving efficiency, really changing the game in terms of how data centers are making the best use of all these electrons that they're using. The numbers tend to freak people out a little bit when they look at how much energy data centers are using. And I think we're getting a little bit better at telling the story about how much energy the data center is saving, because we're taking all these business processes and putting them in some of the most efficient facilities around being built by some of our largest and most successful technology companies. The power story has been an interesting frontier because the push towards renewable energy hasn't been a simple one. And so in terms of talking about our fire starters, I thought a good place to kick it off would be with Adam Kramer from Switch, who has some experience with the Borderlands, which going to the sort of intersection between the data center and utility industry, and essentially coming from a place that you want 11 bazillion megawatts of power and you want it to be 100% green. And I'm only exaggerating slightly, but maybe talk a little bit about what that process has been like for Switch and what that's meant for you, at least in Nevada.
Well, thank you, Rich. I think it's really a tale of two stories for us, if you will, on what Switch's journey to green energy has been. Is that, you know, you talk about efficiency, and it's a great lead into the panel, and that's been Switch's focus since day one. When Rob Roy founded the company, it was about kind of achieving that efficiency. So 270 patents, really trying to drive through the efficiency, but at a certain point it became, all right, we've really hit this peak efficiency and we continue to push on it, but how do we now make sure that we deliver 100% renewable energy product for our load? So in 2011, 2012 timeframe, he approached the utility in Nevada, NV Energy, and said, hey, I'm looking for a 100% renewable energy solution. And they basically said, that's great. And that was the end of the conversation. You know, continue to push and push. And long story short is to not drag it out. Today, Switch is 100% green, and we have been since January 1st, 2016. We achieved our goal, but it wasn't without a heck of a fight, to be honest with you. We had to pursue direct access. We wrote and introduced a constitutional amendment to eliminate the energy utility monopoly in Nevada, which passed by 75% vote in 2016, excuse me. And today we're a direct access customer with 180 megawatts of solar being built, and we will continue to always focus on additionality and locality for our renewable energy. And so when we were doing our site selection in Michigan, hoping to not repeat that story, we first reached out to Consumers Energy, and Garrick is here with Consumers, so I'll let him talk about his side of the story in a moment. But for us, what was key is we want a good relationship with utility. We want to work with utility, and part of our site selection was, is there going to be an immediate availability of renewable energy for our start of our load, and is there going to be a pathway to a green tariff that will solve our problem of additionality and locality for new renewable resources over time? The answer to the first question was yes. They had a pathway that day one we turned on the lights, we were 100% green, we're able to do that using existing renewable resources. But to achieve our second goal, which was a tariff that would allow us to be procuring cause and be part of a new renewable resource in the market that supported Switch's load growth, and that helped increase the green energy. And I should mention that none of this counts towards a renewable portfolio standard. This is Switch is retiring 100% of the attributes, which is an important piece of this. That didn't exist at the time, but they were up for the challenge. And I have to tell you the tale of two stories. One is heading down with a constitutional amendment. Another one is a partnership that is as good as any partnership that exists between a utility and a C&I customer, I think, in the country for what we've been able to do to this date.
So Garrick, tell us what that's looked like on your side. You have this huge customer coming to you. They bought a big pyramid and they want to make it into a data center.
Well, thanks, Adam, for your comments, and thanks for the opportunity to address the group here. There are some utilities that want to bury their head in the sand. There are some utilities that want to defend the model. There are some utilities that are trying to figure out what to do, and our view is we've got to be progressive and we've got to listen to our customers, and that's the heart of it. We just got to listen to our customers. We're a regulated utility, or actually a little bit of a hybrid in Michigan, but the policymakers and the Public Utility Commission cannot move fast enough. And I have a lot of respect for those in Michigan, so that's not meant to be an insult, but our customers are moving faster, and we need to listen to our customers. And when Switch came into Michigan and was looking for an opportunity, it was just as simple as that. It was, can you bring the power as quickly as we need it? Which we answered yes to. That's our bread and butter. That's what we do. We deliver reliability, we deliver electric infrastructure, we're a gas company as well. That's our bread and butter. The other question was, can you deliver 100% renewables? And really it caused pause for us because our first solution on 100% renewables wasn't additionality. And at the time, I had no way of delivering additionality for Switch here. But I made a commitment that day that that was going to happen. And a year later, we're introducing a new green tariff that has a variety of different optionality with additionality, working hand in hand in a partnership to develop what that looks like. So it wasn't, hey, utility go off and develop a tariff. It was, what do you think about this tariff? How does this look like? Can we make this work for you? Can we make this work not only for Switch, but could we make it work for other data providers in the state? Can we enhance the technology platform within Michigan? And frankly, it's even bigger than Switch. And I think some utilities got to figure this out because right now in Michigan, we've got mobility going on between the big three automakers. We've got autonomous vehicles as a great opportunity. Just a report in Forbes today, Michigan is leading, Grand Rapids specifically, in the second largest manufacturing growth in the nation. And so there are others that are counting on the ability for cloud. There are others that are counting on computing abilities. And we need to be able to provide that for the state of Michigan. And that's our job as utilities, to be able to work with our customers. And so I get pretty passionate about it because some of our earlier speakers, you know, we just got to listen to our customers, and our customers are leading the way, and we've got to figure out solutions. And then we're doing that in Michigan, not just for the data center industry, but for all industries.
Thank you. Interesting case study of what can happen there. Maybe bring in Marvin, talk about Baselayer a little bit. And you're also a company that has worked with some of the local utilities on some interesting initiatives. Maybe you could tell us a little bit about your work in Arizona.
Yeah, so it's really interesting what we're trying to do over at Baselayer. So obviously, you know, being born from a true data center company and starting out that way, we're really trying to bridge that gap, right? I mean, we all sit here and we talk about these discussions between the utility and the data center. We all know this needs to happen. It's happening some places quicker than others, clearly. And what's interesting to me and where I see us moving is the communication. We all talk about it, but is it truly happening? Even from the data center side, there's a lot of infrastructure that sits out there on the utility side that the data center provider or contractor wouldn't even consider using because it's not theirs, right? Everybody likes to own theirs. But if you really want to be efficient, why would you build a whole nother chiller system if you already have chilled water that's provided by a utility? Like that's double duty. Why would you spend the money? Why would you use those resources? And same on the electric grid as well. So I think what we're really trying to do is provide a product that kind of helps bridge the gap, right? We want to say, we understand what the customer wants, we understand what the providers have, how do we get everybody to work together, and in the process, oh, by the way, here's a product that you can use to help do that. So at Baselayer, I mean, we really want to help move this forward and start to have these conversations and help with these conversations. As you guys know, the stuff we've done in Arizona with SRP is a perfect example. From the data center perspective, probably the last thing people want to talk about, right? There's no generators, there's no UPS, right? It's an uncomfortable conversation to have. But at the same time, this facility has been up and running and hasn't had any outages. So as uncomfortable as it is, there's truth behind it as well, as you don't necessarily have to do it the old way, right? This industry has been around for a long time. There's been a lot of people who have made a lot of money off of being risk adverse in this industry, but times are changing and this industry needs to change. The utility's in the same boat. Times are changing, things are getting different. You know, power capacity is increasing way more rapidly than I think we could have ever planned on. So how do we change? And the key to it is instead of just saying, well, how does the data center market change? How does the utility market change? How do we change together? How do we do this so it progresses in a positive way for both of us so we're not dealing with this again in 5 to 10 years? Right. And from a global perspective, I think us here in the States are used to being the leaders, but I think we can all agree that if you look at the global market, they're trying to take that leap. Instead of being 5 years behind us, they're trying to jump to what's next. So they're going to miss this gap that we're kind of struggling with now. So I think us as the leaders need to make sure that we set the proper infrastructure and kind of guidelines to progress the rest of the world so we don't run into a bigger global issue.
And for those who don't know, the data station initiative that Baselayer has going on is where they're bringing modular data centers to the utility infrastructure, to one of the high reliability intersections on the grid, and therefore are able to run without UPS and generators, and have some folks looking at that to test that out now. What are some of the things, Killian, why don't you talk a little bit about where you see the opportunities in the Borderlands here?
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely. I mean, this whole conference so far has been very exciting for me. Just introduce myself, Killian Tobin, CEO, founder of Omega Grid, and we provide a distribution level market system. So it's literally the intersection of the large C&I customers and the utilities. We've talked a lot about the need for it and why it would benefit both teams. I don't think, quite frankly, the industry has done a good enough job of kind of thanking our utilities, this tremendous amount of intrinsic value that they provide to all of us throughout the 100 years of existence. It's something that we don't want to go away and that we all depend on every day. We've talked a lot about that. So how do we encourage everybody to play together in a free marketplace where the utility can continue to exist, to provide the fleets of trucks and keep the lights on literally, and where the large C&I customers are incentivized to provide their own assets to the grid. And so when we talk about deploying one of these systems in some of these markets, it sounds like a simple idea, but there's so many moving parts that have been written in with tariffs and sunk costs into different assets that, and quite frankly, the software's not even there yet in a lot of ways. So there's a lot of work to be done in this space. It's very exciting. Patrick earlier talked about the biggest arbitrage opportunity, and if that looks like a big opportunity for the data center space, imagine all the other 99% of load out there. And when you talk about the investment into the renewable resources, that's what's spurring this. That's what's really creating a new paradigm for our centralized utilities. They have to find ways to deal with this, and that centralized power system that we set up 100 years ago, we have to look at ways to move past that now. And the economics of the investments are changing rapidly, and it's very exciting. I mean, I looked at this type of solution about a year ago, and it wasn't ready yet, and it was going to be 10 years away. I looked at it again in January, it was 5 years away. I don't know how much faster this space can move. We've talked a little bit about it's moving quicker and quicker. If I look at it next year, is it going to be 1 year away, 2 years away? And how do we help our utilities move through this?
Killian mentioned software. Martin, you have some thoughts on what the opportunities are on the software front?
Yeah, it's Martin Otterson, OSIsoft. We're pretty lucky. I think every day I wake up thinking 40 years of software and coming from the industrial space. So OSIsoft stood for Oil Systems Incorporated, our first customers in Hawaii, still a customer today. But the key is that they were a refinery. And what we did was able to take Oil Systems Incorporated next to a pulp and paper mill. And we had to do something about the name, had to change it. But the practice here, I think we can apply to what we hear today, is taking industry knowledge and being able to apply it, best practices across between different industries. And that's why I say when I wake up every day, we're so lucky that customers use our system, which is called the PI system, to generate power, transmission, distribution, but also pulp and paper and heavy industry. All of a sudden, customers in the data center side use it as well. And now, how do you take technology and apply it to great partnerships that you just heard about? And I think ultimately, if we think about our biggest problem in the room, it's these partnerships, and it's not the technology. It's the partnerships that we need to forge as a community, build a community for a network effect to make change. Because the change you make, then you inspire others, and it moves on and on. And that's why I think it's quite fun from an opportunity perspective. The community, I can't stress enough, is where we all participate as vendors, users, application providers, experts that can then say, hey, I got this great novel idea. How do we turn this novel idea into a business? And the business that I see in front of us is the ability to transform the industry. You just heard an example of a customer coming to the utility and change the way you do business to meet my needs. And by the way, now the utility can do that for others that come in. And things like smart cities are bred. Things like dynamic interchanges of the ability to use data to build new business models. Earlier, someone talked about utility as a service versus just plugging in and having power available. Everyone still wants that same ability, but would you change the business model in which you deliver it? And I think that's where we can focus as we merge our industries together in this convergence. The last thing I would say is that we've learned a lot from an operational technology and an IT integration. The data center market's done that already. You're basically a plant for IT where facilities and IT work strongly hand in hand, and you've already built that cultural influence. Whereas in a plant, there still is a lot of different dynamics that go on. And so that's where I think the industrial world would learn a lot from the data center. And the opportunity, I think, is endless, and it's quite exciting.
You have good observation that facilities and IT work together, but if you talk to our data center folks, I don't hear those words. They say IT works very differently than the facilities work there. But I have a question. There was some mention about the desirability of a data center load because it's 24/7 very steady. And David, from your point of view, you mentioned something about batteries that you're trying to work on. Tell us how do that play into your mix of generation and distribution?
Yeah, so what we're trying to do, let's give the Canadian perspective in Quebec. With the speed of technology, IT, OT, everything is coming together. The speed of the demand and the speed of how utility is adjusting to these technology velocity and the velocity and demand, we had to come closer to our customers. And that's what we're trying to do, not only by trying to give a one turnkey solutions to data centers, for example. So we're trying to look at technology we can offer data centers, for example, using our 1.2 megawatt batteries as a support system, for example. Looking at land, well, we have land that we can offer. Different programs, we have put experts to optimize the energy that the data center can use with the different programs, governmental programs that are existing. So we're trying to put all this bundle from technology, regulations, programs, expertise all together. So once we have people coming to see us, we have one-stop shop and gives us the opportunity to understand the customer needs. And technology like battery that you're talking about is definitely something. Like I said earlier, we've pushed even batteries to be used into houses now. We can simulate outages, and on the TV screen, you're going to have the consumption that's live being used, using the integration of all the different devices that we have, and that's really the key for us to be successful.
Very good, thank you. So we also heard about data centers like Baselayer that is trying to develop a system that will not require as much backup infrastructure, as I understand that. How does it impact the companies like Schneider, which is primarily focused is to provide that kind of infrastructure? Have you given some thoughts to it? Are you familiar with that concept?
Yes, we have. So, maybe starting with the earlier context that you phrased, we believe that creditworthy, stable load is the oceanfront property of this new energy landscape that we're going into, and clearly the folks we're with here today, possess that. So it's a very valuable asset, something that Schneider Electric has been in the business of serving for a long time. But we're also in the business of serving the electric utility industry. It's one of the oldest markets that we've served all around the world. And so we really think of the entire value chain. We don't necessarily discriminate whether you're counting the electron or kilowatt hour or BTU on one side of the meter versus another. We think about something called control center to customer, which is really looking at that entire perimeter and saying, what's the best way to go solve that? So some of the things that we've been doing to kind of connect those dots is thinking about that load and thinking about the new requirements that people have around energy. I would say more than ever before, people want to disaggregate that electron into its attributes. How predictable is the cost of it today? How sustainable is it? How resilient is it? What options does it give me when I'm procuring energy? And they're looking to maybe solve for unique outcomes for themselves. Often to do that requires infrastructure, right? It requires distributed energy assets, load control, batteries, distributed generation, et cetera. And thinking about, how do you get that infrastructure built? Is it something I want to do myself? Or is it something I'm interested maybe in having an investor come in and put those things in for me? And of course, that investor can both be folks that are willing to do it on the utility side, like we heard some great case study here for consumer, but also on the demand side. And one great example of that, actually two, I guess, with our partner Duke, we're deploying two different microgrid architectures, one for Montgomery County, Maryland, and the other one for our headquarters in Boston. And in both cases, the customer wanted the benefits of a microgrid, so better resiliency, sustainability, but didn't want to put CapEx down to do it. And it could be because, the return on investment of putting more solar on the roof is longer than if I were to go and invest in building another factory or something. But in finding a partner, in this case it was Duke, who was willing to invest those assets and own those assets on behalf of Montgomery County, Maryland, and Schneider Electric, we were able to go and help deliver those benefits today.
I'm sorry. So we have heard a lot about renewable energy sources, and a lot of data centers have desired to go to 100%. Switch mentioned about having 100% renewable. So I'm going to ask this question about Duke and Chris. When you see this renewable request, which is intermittent by nature, and your infrastructure grid is basically absorbing all those variations that are happening, and still supplying them power, probably produced by the coal at the middle of the night when solar is not available. How are you addressing the issue of the intermittency of this renewable power?
That's a really tough question to answer. I mean, I think, renewables are going to always make up a portion of the grid. I mean, but it's never going to be a silver bullet. I think, from my standpoint, it's a very interesting conversation that we're having here today. Because while I work with a 100-year-old electric utility company and have a very conservative viewpoint and perspective, I also work for a renewable energy provider or a division of that in REC Solar. And we've worked with Schneider on several projects, and I think the main thing that the utilities are really struggling with, at least that I can see, and one of the things that Duke is struggling with is policy and the regulators. I mean, there's 3,000 utility companies in the United States, and all of them have different perspectives of grid saturation levels of renewables and how much renewables are going to have an impact on their overall supply. So I think from Duke's perspective, third-party aggregators are really going to be the ones that are going to be most influential, because they're the ones that can actually see behind client X, Y, and Z, their named accounts, and they can provide that data to the utility company. Because right now, Duke has blindfolds on, right? I mean, they can see your load. They send you a bill. They know how many kilowatt hours you have, how many kW you have, but as far as being able to do anything with that data, their hands are basically tied. So I think the future of where we really need to go as an industry is to get third-party aggregators that have the data readily available, know where those pressure points are in the grid, and then working with the utilities to create the rate structures as we've all kind of described to kind of alleviate some of those pressure points across the board.
Good point. And there was also discussion about demand response within data centers, whether it's being used, how it is being used. A couple of observations here. I believe in the Northeast, which is the utilities do allow data center folks to put on their generators and bring the power on during the critical periods of time. It's not allowed in California. It's not from the point of view of utilities. is point of view of the California Air Resources Board that doesn't allow a backup diesel generators to be turned on as long as power is available. Now, talking about demand response, there are a couple of ways you can do that. Of course, using a battery is one way. The other way is to be able to dynamically reduce your load, and that's on the load side of it. And that's where there was some mention about the data center manager, or basically some software that will say, if you have a load that can be scheduled to a different time, that can be done. If it is, or you can even, I've come across a company, a very large company that makes software that allows the consolidation of multiple virtual machines into a single piece of hardware so that you compact them and thereby reduce the amount of electricity used almost in a dynamic fashion. And that's again allows you to really wrap the power up and down and have direct connection with the grid so that you are not really static only on the one side where you are reducing the power, but if you have a flexible load, you can even increase the power consumption. So those technologies are evolving. I have a question for Jason on your root data centers. Are you using a lot of renewable power, and what's your philosophy in terms of trying to stabilize the power there in case of, due to this intermittency of the renewable power?
Yeah, so at Root, we're very fortunate actually. We're located in the province of Quebec, which has the 99.7% green renewable grid, and because it's hydroelectric, it's very stable. So we don't have the coal power and the peak kind of shaving of these sort of dirty power sources from the grid that some of the other sort of states and provinces experience. So we're very fortunate from that perspective. And I've actually spent a fair amount of time kind of examining this energy digital, 4.0 thing. What does it mean? And how can we as data center providers make a meaningful impact to, the grid in Quebec and across North America? And there's a lot of kind of great theories that I've kind of read about, like blockchain and sort of these microgrid concepts. Peak load shaving, alternative energies, and I think really when determining what is going to be kind of the prevailing, and everything will kind of work collaboratively together to sort of drive this energy sort of revolution. But I think really when examining, which one's going to be predominant, is really taking a look at what one will have the most meaningful impact in your local grid, and it varies from grid to grid, of course. And then the second one is what has an ROI. I mean, we're all in business to make money, and green technology, and the reason it's, I think, starting to get a lot of traction right now is, one, there's a major social benefit, but it is really becoming affordable to do. And if we look at kind of the industry as a whole that we're in today, data centers consume about 2% of the grid's kind of power, and that was forecast to be 4%, and it actually slowed down over the last few years according to DOE. Because of efficiencies that we've all achieved collaboratively together, which is fantastic. And if we look at the HVAC power consumption of homes, that is consuming 9% of our grid, so 5 times what data centers are. So, I mean, if you want to make a meaningful impact, get everyone to use Nests in their house, and that will do more than we could collaboratively do together. But I think there's a lot of focus on our space because, very few people control a lot of that 2% of power. So it's very easy to make a radical change across our entire industry very quickly, where getting Nests into millions and millions of homes is a much longer kind of vision. And so for us as sort of commercial enterprises, I think the biggest thing, at least for us anyway in Quebec, that will have the biggest impact is peak energy sort of shaving. And kind of to give an example, for us, we operate 90% of the year at a PUE of 1.12. And our annualized average is about 1.2. And for 2% of the year, we peak up to 1.6. So we have this, massive amount of energy that we waste, and then we make it difficult for, Hydro-Québec to handle for, that 2% of the year. And with the major advancements that have been happening in battery sort of technology, battery costs have come down 80% over the last 6 years. lithium ion, and it's now at about a cost of $227 a kilowatt, and some are estimating down to $190 a kilowatt hour. So for about a 4% investment, you can basically run your entire data center on battery power for an hour. An increased investment over your kind of normal costs. So I think that for us is an area that we can really focus in. And I know the Equinix guys mentioned earlier that takes up a lot of space. I think fortunately there's a lot of data centers out there that because densities have increased, they have a lot of extra space and they don't have power. So an ROI for a data center that has 2 or 3 megawatts of power that they could sell into, but can't get more power from the utility grid, or need to make a major investment to go to a new distribution sort of source. That type of investment has a really immediate ROI for that business. So I think that is kind of an area that we could all kind of focus on, or we would look to focus on anyway.
Could I add a comment too on kind of the intermittent
Sure, please.
piece of?
Yeah, I'm going to ask the question to you guys anyway.
Yes. So I think when we think about this as one industry and kind of peak shaving or demand response, I think we missed the mark. I think we really have to look out across the entire grid.
Yes.
And, I mean, and think from a big picture perspective, I think the utilities, I mean, this is where our sweet spot should be, is to be able to integrate this. And there's a lot of dynamics that play out, as we all know, across there. But a lot of that intermittent nature can be taken care of by a healthy managed grid system. So it's not one silver bullet, as been mentioned here. It's transmission resources. It's a variety of renewable resources, so it's not all dependent on solar. Or, hydro is another great example. It is leveraging the storage. We're bullish on what's going on with battery technology from a short duration perspective for backup, but also there's a lot of research going on by organizations like EPRI and pump storage, but also compressed air. There's a lot of different avenues here on how we can advance the renewable without necessarily getting too hung up on the intermittent nature of it. I think there's solutions out there. It's just a matter of looking at it at a broad scale.
And that is true. There are multiple technologies and they can all play together. But in California, as we see, the renewable requirement is increasing on the grid. When it reaches 1/3 or higher, I understand that there is requirement of more spinning reserves just to have more renewable. So in that case, I see there will be a need for putting the battery backup some way. And if that happens, do you expect the cost of that battery to be passed on to the data centers which are requiring 100% renewable versus passing it on to the entire group of your customers? What do you see the models evolving over the period of time?
I think the one who wins in the end is the one who's able to integrate all this. I mean, I think that's where that's where the true, when I see the collision, and I mean that in a good way, between the data centers and the grid, is it's much broader than just data centers. Mm-hmm. There are a number of players in this, and being able to incorporate the right price signals and the right information and kind of a Borderlands discussion, edge IT, however you want to look at that, that's where the opportunity exists, where you've got clear price point for an individual who's bringing solar to the market or curtailing, and what the battery looks like in the local area. I think the utilities could lead the way there if they're willing to work with really smart, integrated type companies who can manage all that data. I think there's a real opportunity there as far as managing the grid in the future.
And if I can add, I said the one thing I'd like to add to that is I think that when you talk about who's going to bear the cost, I think that the system works itself out fairly well in the situation when you look at utilities having to go to the market to buy resources, right? Mm-hmm. Is you'll see less market demand when you have more storage, and you look at the cost of storage beginning to drop. Mm-hmm. It's going to solve its own intermittency issue, right? It's not even, and so you could say that the cost for the batteries are going to be offset by not having to go to the market and using lowest cost available resource when it's available, mm-hmm. Even if it's for storage. So I don't know that it's necessarily a cost being added to the system, mm-hmm. versus a cost being shifted in the system that will eventually deliver a fully flat renewable system.
Yeah, I'll just add on. I mean, it doesn't have to be an either or.
Yeah.
It can be both, right? Yeah. And
so we would like to have more participation from your audience here to see if you have any questions. And I'm going to ask one question to all of you. If we were going to be sitting here 5 years from now, what do you think the topics you'll be talking about? What's your bold prediction there? Or if you have any questions, please come ahead and ask all these experts over here who can probably give you their input, something that you have been thinking about for some time. So raise your hand. Bruce has got his mic there.
Hi, my name is Eric. I'm with Hydro-Québec. There's something I didn't hear about today, and there's one big player is missing, and it's the blockchain industry, which we do not see. And I have some demand right now, from about a year ago, and those guys are asking for a lot of power. And we're going to see this industry coming very strong because we're shifting the human decision-taking to machine decision-taking. Blockchain is an example where you have mathematical operation taking a decision for a transaction instead of human taking the decision. So this is something that we should, Bruce, in the future discussion, that we should have.
Maybe it's worth kind of jumping in real quick and just.
Yeah, go ahead.
Blockchain is, how many people know what blockchain is or have heard about it? Okay, you guys all have to explain it now. How about Bitcoin? Okay, so I think everybody knows Bitcoin. It's basically digital cash, and the way that they ensure transactions are not duplicated is through computing power and encryption. And so in order to kind of move past that a little bit and apply it to other business processes, they expanded the definition and kind of tweaked the technology and spawned this blockchain definition. And in a lot of cases, they do require a lot of computing power, but mostly those are for the worldwide networks of kind of cryptocurrency calculations. There's a lot of research being done and a lot of new products being developed, including ours, on private blockchains that don't require as much sort of compute power at the edge. And so this is an emerging technology. It's very exciting because it enables all sorts of new coordination between machines and without bringing it all back to a central control room right away. So I don't know if... Oh, from miners in your...
For miners, yeah.
And so you should charge them more money, yeah.
So there's a couple of interesting sort of examples of where the blockchain has kind of come in, because these guys do come in, they want a lot of power up front. This became an issue in Washington State, where the local utility in Wenatchee, the blockchain, the Bitcoin community specifically, became interested in the availability of and the price of power in Wenatchee, because the same reason you have all the data centers in Quincy, a lot of the Bitcoin folks were interested in Wenatchee, and they were sort of overwhelmed with Bitcoin miners all wanting a lot of power. And they were like, look, we're going to take a break. And essentially what they came up with was essentially a different rate, a different tariff for high-density users. And it was a pretty interesting discussion. They wound up working closely with it, but a lot of the Bitcoin guys said, hey, look, this changes our economics completely. Now, what's happened in the last few months, if you've looked at the price of Bitcoin, is that it has surged again. It's up, in like $2,700, where just, it's doubled over in the matter of a couple of months. And that has changed a lot of things. Suddenly you're seeing, you can't get some type of GPU units because people are mining Ethereum with them. They're, AMD units are unavailable in some cases. So there's a lot of potential there in terms of, as data center customers, the Bitcoin crowd has been problematic in some areas because there have been some failures, but there have been some real opportunities created through the blockchain, which is a separate technology. And one of the areas that you're going to see it coming to the fore is in the financial industry, which has always been an important high-value customer set for the data center industry. These guys are serious about it. They look at the blockchain as a way to do all the things they do now, but without the same cost. Essentially, And without the human brain, yeah. Anyway, watch this space, because there's a lot of interesting things going on.
It's an existential crisis for the financial industry, especially if you're an intermediary like a bank or a government. And there's been, I mean, I'd say in the last 6 months, I've had probably 7 other competitors announce that they're going into the energy space. So.
Question there.
Yeah, a question. How do these data center folks decide where to put a data center? Are there certain areas that are high concentration of data centers in the U.S., or is this related to who needs all this information, like the blockchains? And so what really drives where to put, or is this the utilities who give better incentives to bring in, or the states giving incentives? Because this should be a pretty good steady load from what I hear. So how do you decide where to put these data centers? And is there any fear of moving them overseas or something like that?
We're both pointing to Adam because that's exactly what he does at Switch. What are the factors that you look at in making decisions?
The first thing, of course, is availability, right? So being able to serve large, dense populations within certain latency, right? So we strategically positioned each of our prime campuses to serve each region in the country: Northeast, Southeast, Northwest, Southwest. Second thing is, of course, power, right, is this conversation. In our situation, our site selection is contingent not just on power availability from the physical grid and the availability to deliver it to certain locations, but also the availability or pathway to, as you've seen, for renewable energy to be 100% green. And finally is, yes, we need a competitive environment for our clients from a tax perspective. So the environments we're in have low to no sales tax specifically for data center versus neighboring states or other environments to do this. And one of our jokes in Nevada is, hey, leave the natural disasters and tax disasters of California behind. Come over to Nevada. So those are the kinds of things that we're looking at as we site select and as we grow.
So basically, if you really think about it, is what is the input to the factory? What's the output? Information comes in, information comes out. So you should have a good cable, all these communications connections there. The power goes in, heat comes out. So you have to have the cooling and the power availability. And then again, there are some geographic locations that make it necessary, because I was reading somewhere that Ireland, which is the other side of the channel or the other side of the big pond here, is becoming one of the largest energy consumer in data centers, where the electricity consumption will comprise more than 15% of their electricity consumption in the next 5 to 7 years. They have such a big growth market, and one of the reasons is because all these cables are landing in Ireland. So there are many other factors that go into the place. Climate is one, power is another one, ability to serve the local area is another one. This is a science and the art, and then there's incentives. Which state brings out more incentives and which utilities have more incentives, they all go into a mix. Availability of labor force, for example.
So hi, I'm Carsten Baumann with Schneider Electric. I have a question on this relates to the on-site generation of power for C&I clients, including data centers, as well as the utilities. So I can imagine that in states such as California, on-site generation, whether it's like the example which was mentioned earlier about Qualcomm down in San Diego using a big CHP plant, on-site generation using natural gas becomes less expensive than actually buying the utility power. Do you think that if more and more C&I customers have their own on-site generation, that this will change the utility rates in those kind of states? So could we see that in California the power per kilowatt will be, I don't know, 2 to 3 cents like in Quebec? Or is this something totally unrealistic? And at what point becomes on-site generation more relevant?
Maybe, but look at what happened to landlines when mobile phones came out. It had that unintended, landlines got more and more expensive because there were less people to burden the cost of the sunk investments.
That's a very, very good question about self-generation. And a previous company I worked with, we looked into self-generation. You can certainly reduce the cost. You could probably use the waste heat. If you're just starting from the very beginning, it's very difficult to go back and retrofit. It's pretty expensive. But the bottom line is, it's only possible if the utilities try to take over the plant operation. For those companies to run the plant operation is not a very easy job. Think about it, you have some workforce there that has some ambitions to continue to grow. You need to keep on hiring them again and again, or you need to have somebody else manage it for you. It becomes a very challenging affair, and that's not their core business. If you think about it even today, the way data centers are going on, the IT people really want to have the racks and nothing to do with the backup system. If that's something that they are not very familiar with, they want to outsource it. Why would they want to insource the power generation? That's the question I will come across.
Yeah, I think, Chris, you mentioned it, right? So, I mean, you own, like in our collaboration with Schneider Electric, you own these assets, right? So we just buy the power from you, but you own the behind-the-meter energy as a service. Is this something becoming really innovative, and will this take off, or is this some exception to the norm?
I mean, I think different utilities, again, are going to handle it different ways. You install a generator on your side of the meter, you're now going to be hit with departing load fees. I mean, if a utility sets up the infrastructure to bring you a certain amount of power, and then somewhere down the line you say, I want to generate half of my own power, now they're going to charge you and say, well, we shouldn't have brought you all that infrastructure, so we're going to charge you extra money per kilowatt hour. I mean, there's a whole host of different ways to go about bringing power on site, but globally, like, how does that drive down the price per kilowatt hour? I'm just not. I don't necessarily see that happening in the future.
And even if you have your own power plant, you have to account for the servicing and maintenance of the power plant. And during that time, when you shut it down, you have to get the power from another source. And that is when you require infrastructure, which is sitting idle for 99% of the time, except 1% of the time when you are trying to do your maintenance. Somebody has to pay the cost for that. So that if you look into all of these aspects, it becomes much easier if the utility owns the power plant, just like another asset, near a data center. That might make sense.
So I would just add, we've, in Michigan, there's quite a bit of manufacturing load, paper processing, and a lot that uses quite a bit of steam, and even particle board press uses a lot of steam. And we've had two here in the last year, given the low natural gas prices, look at self-generation by themselves and putting the model together, and then also in conjunction with the utility. And so where we would actually own the asset on the other side of their meter and sell them steam and operate the plant. And in both cases, financially, it didn't pen out or ink out. Now, there's different markets, and it may work. But I think that's a real, the whole piece, though, is I talked about some utilities kind of defending the model, and some utilities kind of burying their head in their sand. As utilities have less investment opportunity, you can bet to hit their financial model, they're going to be pushing a lot of it into the grid, and sometimes not with the best intentions, more of an intention of earnings versus what is really the best customer value. I would also suggest that some utilities, from a financial standpoint, to hit earnings there, are going to spread those same infrastructure costs, which is a lot of stranded costs in our business, over less and less people, which is going to drive the cost per kilowatt up. So it can occur. And I think that's going to be a mistake for some utilities, because I think it's, although the death spiral article that was out a few years ago was, I think, a little overplayed, I think it is going to be an impact to some utilities where they have to kind of rethink their model. Some will be too late. I think you're going to see a lot of M&A action in this industry, in the utility industry, driven on the fact that some can't make their model work anymore, and so they've got to look elsewhere to be able to grow. So I think that's an outcome of that scenario right there.
Exactly.
So I'd like to ask a question of the panel, if I may. Some of you saw a note that I sent that I live in Santa Fe, New Mexico, and the Santa Fe Institute that deals with complex theory, every time they have a scientist speak, he, she has to finish the presentation with an outrageous idea. So I'd like to ask each of you to give me your most outrageous idea for the future of energy as
So-
it relates to compute?
Thank you,
And then-
Bruce. And before you do that, I think I want to give the chance to the audience to see if they have some outrageous idea to give before our speakers,
Absolutely,
panelists do
absolutely.
that.
So we know that that blockchain is a disruptor. It's a very big idea. Where do you put quantum compute? Where do you put silicon photonics? Where do you put some of these things on the IT side of the ledger? Where do you put AI? Where do you put, and then what's the offset for that on the energy side, or are they the same thing? So this is open for the room.
Yeah. First, I'd like to give the audience a chance.
Thank you, Patrick.
Yeah, one outrageous idea, a vision, a renewable energy plant, whatever it is, solar, wind, offshore, tidal, that has no copper leaving the site, only fiber. So not tied to the grid. Sure, you'd have intermittency, but imagine, and I think it'll happen somewhere in some way for some purpose, maybe an offshore wind farm with huge utilization factors where the servers are on site and you never have any copper leaving and you have fiber leaving instead.
Great one, great one.
Good point.
Who's got an idea? Most outrageous idea? Come on. Yes, all right.
Really going crazy. Wi-Fi electricity.
Like you covered your mouth. Wi-Fi what?
Sorry?
Wi-Fi what?
Wi-Fi electricity.
Wireless electricity.
There's some initiatives along that with over-the-air
Yeah,
charging.
the distance is not that far, so. Yeah, well,
Right.
my daughter's going to be upset. Her phone is not going to be working for long, so.
Who else? Outrageous idea.
Come on, yeah, you all know data center industry well.
And it goes back to the on-site generation of, like where you consume the power. One idea, obviously, in terms of efficiency is bring the compute power to where the power is being generated. Well, then obviously you can also bring the power to where the compute is being needed. And so I believe that, in 5 to 10 years, I think we will see, maybe even sooner, large data center farms generating their own power and not even depending on the utility grids at all anymore. And they are in control of the technology, the resiliency, the reliability, the maintenance, and so forth. It puzzles me to some point where, let's say in Quincy, Oregon, where we see massive data center conglomerates of different companies together, why are they not generating their own power together somehow? So bypassing the utility. So this is something I see.
I think they're getting the power from hydro-generated power from the BPA, the Bonneville Power Administration dams. So they have a hydropower availability there in that area. But this is a good idea, but I'll say something else here. You're talking about big data centers, and I foresee not only big data centers, but also a lot of small edge data centers. When self-driving cars are driving, you go and check your maps. You're not worried about what the map of England looks like. Looking at the map of the local area, immediate fast feedback, communication to your cell tower. So every cell tower probably will have a small data center connected to it. And those small edge data centers probably will get connected to this big data center for other activities. And whether these small data centers, edge data centers, how will they be powered? What their reliability would be? Would they still have some extra assets that are underutilized all the time? For example, your backup generators, your UPS and your batteries, they are very less underutilized. How will that happen? I do not know. But I do expect smaller data centers will proliferate over the next 5 to 10 years.
Well, I think we should replicate the human brain and network them. Maybe even a hybrid approach, but I don't think you'll get more efficiency and lower heat production.
That's really good. Thanks, Dale.
I got one here. Utilities providing Wi-Fi through the smart meters, next generation.
Yeah, there's going to be a big write-off about all the current infrastructure, right? So it could be interesting. I wonder who's going to pay for that.
Yeah. Well, one more outrageous idea is cryogenics, that is the frozen transmission line and frozen transformers. All this high voltage, you're afraid of copper because of all this extra high voltage. It'll all go away. It's about 15 years. We are working on it. It's 15 years further, but it could come down very quickly. No more large coppers, no more transmission lines, maybe just a solid state device, just sending power at low voltages. You may not even see extra high voltages in future, close to Wi-Fi power.
Mm.
That's Energy 5.0.
Yep. So go ahead.
So I'm really going to just jump on a couple of the ideas, the edge and the no output wires. But we're sitting here in San Francisco, of course, all ultimately connected, but there's still 1 billion people without access to power today, and there's another 1.5 billion people that only have access to intermittent energy. I mean, you're sitting here at what if the data center was the nucleus, of a remote community. Providing the services, providing the access to virtual work in the future, and at the same time solving some of these energy dilemmas for folks.
Great. That's a perfect one. Thank you. Who else?
I'll make an outrageous claim. Mark Zuckerberg becomes the next president of the United States and mandates 100% green energy.
Maybe Jeff Bezos and Mark Zuckerberg, and who else? Who else do we want to see as the new leaders of the world?
I'm going to default to clean, economical, distributed energy for all. I don't think it's that outrageous, but I think it sounds outrageous enough to some people in the room that I'll call it.
What else have we got?
Okay, so I'm going to ask one question. The data center industry trends. What a data center would look like 5 years from now or 10 years from now? Will they still be doing the, here's Henry here.
Henry's right there.
Mukesh, you already heard my story of it. I wish the previous panel actually started to entertain what that vision was, is a hybrid, secured, distributed data center network, going all the way out to the edge.
All the way to the edge. Hybrid secured data center all the way to the edge. All right, very good.
With a hierarchical data security network, so that we don't have big data funneling into the core data centers.
I love that.
What I'd like to see in the future is that 100% of what goes in power should go out also. So we should build servers that, with the heat produced, they somehow, with, I don't know, the Peltier effect, recreate electricity and put it back on the network. So we'd have one in, one out, and if we get in 2 megawatt, it's 2 megawatt out. So just get in, get out.
Perpetual machine.
Yeah, we just use it and it flows like water.
Fantastic.
Who else? I think this has been a fabulous panel. I actually got more out of this than the rest of the day, frankly. So thank you very much for all your contributions. And with that, we're going to wrap a little bit early because we've got a reception that's about to start. Give you a chance to network a little bit and talk with people. But thank you very much for your contribution. Certainly appreciate it. And this has been a great afternoon. So thank you all.
Thank you all. And thank you for the opportunity.